What's up, Flannelverse? We are live. We are ready for Monday Night Football. We've got the Cleveland Browns at the Denver Broncos. Should be an interesting game. A lot of options on this slate, a lot to go over. Adam and I on the morning show ended up going an hour and 40 minutes because there was so much to go over. I'm going to go a little bit quicker here on my own in this one. While you're coming in, we're going to be going position by position as usual. Quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends, defenses, kickers, and then at the end I will play around with lineups, take a brief look at FanDuel, and take any extra questions you have. Feel free to ask questions throughout the show, of course. Good to see many of you in here already. Yeah, Anthony, excited for the Broncos. They should win this game. They're favored to win this game. I think it could be competitive. I'm excited about it. Yes, B, I do 2 Monday Night Football videos. As long as Adam is willing to do them with me, I'll be doing the morning show with him, where we take a look at some of what he has seen in his sims, and then I do the evening show as well when we have more information, inactives out, etc. Yeah, so currently doing 2 shows per day on the Showdown slates. Hell yeah, Jameson says Brock Bowers got him second place on Friday. That's awesome to hear, Jameson. I mean, it wasn't a particularly contrarian play or anything, not really off the wall there, but yeah, Brock Bowers, that was cool. He went off. Hopefully you had him in your lineups. I bet Neil likes Sutton and Njoku tonight. I mean, sure, yeah, they're 2 of the better plays on the slate. Nothing contrarian about them though. And yes, thank you for the reminder. Dan says, like the video, fellas. Yeah, would appreciate it if you like the video. Subscribe to the channel. Trying to get to, as you can see on the bottom of the screen, trying to get to 5,000 subscribers by the end of the NFL season. Still have a ways to go. I also have subscriber-only mode on in chat on YouTube. That is not to force you to subscribe. It's to try to keep the bots out. And with limited success, they still seem to find their way in. But I'm going to keep trying. All right, I think that's it as far as housekeeping goes. If you want to sign up at Fantasy Points, use promo code Flannelverse for 50% off. I believe they still have a Cyber Monday deal going on. I know 4for4, if you go to 4for4.com/plans, still has a great Thanksgiving deal going on. It's like $7 for the DFS package for the rest of the year. Roto Grinders has a deal going on as well. Check it out if you are interested in all that stuff. But we're going to get into it here. We're going to start with quarterbacks as usual. And I'm going to start by looking at quarterbacks in the captain spot, where we have, and actually let me refresh this. I just want to make sure that they didn't update anything. Yeah, it doesn't look like anything has changed. When you get inactive, sometimes things change a little bit, but wasn't really expecting much. Bo Nix, I guess more reasonable than it was earlier in the day when I swear he was like 40% owned. I forget what it was exactly, but down to 30% captain ownership. Still pretty damn high for Bo Nix. 30% captain ownership, a number that I probably am going to come in light to that, and 54% flex ownership. So we're getting 84% total ownership going to Bo Nix. That's a lot. That's a lot of ownership going to Bo Nix. I think I'm going to be light on that number. He's been very good. But he's kind of stopped running, as Steven pointed out this morning. He hasn't really been running the past 4 weeks. He has like 3 of the past 4. He has 5 or fewer rushing yards. So really brings down the floor and the ceiling if he's not going to run. Of course, maybe not the ceiling, because I think that he still could just decide to run anytime. Like, it's still clearly within his wheelhouse. He has the talent, abilities to start running if he wants to, but definitely brings down the floor if he's not going to be rushing for 40, 50 yards. I think that's a bit much for me. I'm going to be light on that ownership. I'm probably going to set my cap at 20%, and I'm not going to make any exception there for Bo Nix. So probably gets 20% Bo Nix at captain. If you want to get a little more than that, there's nothing wrong with that. We don't have that many great options at captain, so I get it if you want to get more, but I think I'm going to set my cap at 20% and just keep it there, and probably get to 20% Bo Nix at captain. I'd also like to be a little bit light in the flex. He's been very good. Kind of undeniable that he has been a star so far this year. But he still has floor games in his range of outcomes. Could be a tough one. Browns defense has been pretty good. I'm going to pull up my article so I can give you the numbers, but it's been a tough matchup for quarterbacks against the Browns defense. The Browns have allowed I guess not that bad. 13th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to quarterbacks over the past 5 weeks. So they have not been as bad against quarterbacks, but still 13th most, not the top option there, or not the top matchup there. So yeah, I think I'll be a little bit underweight to Bo Nix at captain, and certainly at flex also. I'm going to be underweight. I don't know if I'll get to 40% flex, 20% captain, something like that feels about right to me for Bo Nix. And as far as stacking goes, I always want to, I don't want to say it. I think generally I want to stack Bo Nix. I probably will set my rule to require a stacking partner with Bo Nix, but I don't think you necessarily have to, because he has shown the upside of like 75 rushing yards in a game, 60 yards in another game. Like he clearly like has the ability to spike a big upside in terms of rushing, and then also is going to spread the ball around enough that I think you could play Bo Nix naked in the flex. I think I probably set a rule to require at least one pass catcher, regardless. And then in the captain spot, I think also in the captain spot, that's where I'm really lightening it up. Is I'm only going to require one pass catcher, I think, when I have Bo Nix at captain, because he has that rushing upside, where you don't necessarily need to bring along two pass catchers, but still most of the time would prefer to have multiple. Good note from Sean. That was the one real bit of news that we were waiting on was Josh Reynolds. We thought might return tonight, but he is inactive. They decided not to activate Josh Reynolds for this game. So if you watch the morning show, that is the only real update I think we have as far as inactives go is Josh Reynolds not playing. So we don't have to worry about that messing things up even further for the Broncos passing game. Debro says Sutton or Vele cap. You just love Devon Vele, Debro. No, I mean, I think both are probably strong captains. But Debro does. He has a long history of loving, at least like 2 weeks of loving Devon Vele. All right. Moving on to Jameis Winston. Winston getting 48% in the flex, so a little bit lighter than Bo Nix in the flex. In the captain, Jameis Winston he's up to 13%. He was 7% this morning, and I was like, that's way too low. 13% is probably fair. I might be even lighter on 13%. It was kind of like I wanted to get to 10% when he was at 7%. I probably just flip it the other way. I want to get to a little bit underweight to Jameis Winston, I think, at captain. When I don't mind playing quarterbacks when they are going unowned, but once they start getting ownership for the non-rushing quarterbacks, I tend to just gravitate more toward pass catchers. So I think I probably end up a little bit light on 13% Jameis Winston. Obviously, I think he's a totally fine captain play. Like he's been slinging it. He throws it 40 sometimes every game. So I'm willing to go there, but probably going to be a little bit light at 13% in the captain spot. I probably match the field in the flex on Jameis. I think he's a pretty strong play, given how often he throws it. He's willing to throw it down the field. He's a little bit cheaper than Bo Nix and Courtland Sutton. So I think Winston, 48%. I might get there. I think I'm going to be underweight overall on Winston, but maybe mostly at captain. As far as the matchup goes for Jameis Winston, Broncos defense has allowed the 9th fewest schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to quarterbacks over the past 5 weeks. So not a great matchup for Jameis Winston from that standpoint. But still, I think he can still put up points there. All right. Let's move on to and Jameis Winston. As far as stacking goes, I want him to always be stacked, certainly. And if I have him in the captain spot, I want him to be with at least 2 pass catchers. And again, if you have not caught a previous show, the reason for that is because of the scoring on DraftKings, where the receiver outscores the quarterback on every pass. They get a point per reception, they get more points per yard, more points per touchdown, et cetera, et cetera. It's tough for the quarterback to be the optimal captain if they're just really peppering one player over and over. So if you have unless they're a rushing quarterback, that's the one exception. But if they're a non-rushing quarterback, typically if they are the optimal captain, it's because they are spreading the ball around, so none of their receivers outscore them, and they're still putting up a lot of points with yards and touchdowns, etc. So with Winston, because he doesn't really run and hasn't really shown much upside in terms of running, I always want to have him at least double stacked when I have him at captain, at least one pass catcher if I have Winston in the flex. All right, let's move on to running backs. And I'll move over, look at fantasy points, where they've got them all listed out here. The top projected running back. Oh, and this is different depending where you look. Fantasy Points has Javonte Williams as the top projected running back. Roto Grinders has, at least let me double check this, but as of this morning, it was Nick Chubb, the top projected running back. Not by much. The difference is not all that different for either of them, but because Javonte we brought up first. Let's talk about Javonte first. So he is 6,800 projected for 28.5% ownership in the flex. At captain, Javonte projected for 5% ownership. The role is not that great for Javonte Williams. It has been better the past couple weeks. And I'll just pull up those past couple weeks. So let's see, they didn't play week 10. Oh no, they did. The Browns didn't play week 10. In week 10, we had the Auto Estimate week, where suddenly Auto Estimate was got 14 of the teams, like 17 running back carries. It looked like he was going to be a thing. The coaches talked about him being a thing, and then he ended up not. Over the past two games, has kind of fallen back behind Javonte Williams. Javonte Williams over the past 2 weeks, 17 carries, so not a great role. He's getting 8.5 carries per game over the past 2 weeks, 8 targets, so that's not bad. So four total targets per game over the past 2 weeks on 30% route participation. I mean, these are numbers that, like, a lot of teams, that would be the RB2 numbers. So those would be the numbers that you're expecting from the secondary running back. So even though he is leading the team, he's not really getting that much in terms of volume. And he's 6,800. So I'm not that excited about playing Javonte at his price. I do think, there are scenarios where we could see just the pie getting a little bit bigger and everybody running a little bit more. And, if he gets up to 12 carries and still has those 4 targets, suddenly that would be, enough usage, I think, for a $6,800 running back. But in general, I'm not excited about playing Javonte at this price tag. And this ownership, I think 5% captain ownership, probably fair for Javonte, just in case he does spike an upside in terms of usage this week. Like, I think it's sort of an unknown situation there for the Broncos. They just, like, the week that Auto Estimate had 14 carries was kind of out of nowhere. You never really know what Sean Payton wants to do. Would not be that shocking if Javonte Williams, it's the most likely scenario that Javonte Williams does lead the team, the running backs, in terms of usage again. So I think 5% is a fair number at captain, not one that I'm super excited about, but just, kind of fair. 28.5%. I'm probably with the field, maybe a little bit light overall on Javonte. I don't know. It's a very unpredictable situation. I think I'm probably with the field there. Like, I think that's a fair number, just like given the chaos there. He could show a little bit more in terms of usage. I mean, I guess we can take a look at his game log prior to the past 2 weeks. I don't know that those are necessarily the best indication of his range of outcomes. So if we just look prior to those, so as you can see here, 8 and 9 carries the past 2 weeks, had just 1 the week prior. That was the Auto Estimate week. But prior to that, he did have 12, 17, 14, 6, 13, 16. It's just kind of all over the place. Capping at 17. So not seeing ever like 25 carries in a game, but he has a 5 target game, a 6 target game. So, we could see a spike in terms of Javonte's usage. So I think that the ownership is probably fair there at around 33% total ownership. Not a spot where I'm planning to take any big stand. As far as the other running backs, so we have Auto Estimate and Jaleel McLaughlin behind him. In terms of ownership, for McLaughlin coming in at 16% ownership at 4,800. Auto Estimate coming in at 13% ownership at 4,000. I want to see if either of them is getting captain ownership. McLaughlin getting 1.5% captain ownership. Estimate getting 1% captain ownership. Ultimately, I think McLaughlin just coming in too high for his role on the team. He doesn't, he's kind of the pass catching back, but also doesn't have that great of a role. So, he's getting 17% total ownership. It's not, that far off from where I think it should be, but that's a little bit higher than I think I intend to be with Jaleel McLaughlin, just because we have so many other pretty strong options on the slate who are, I think, a little bit more likely to actually see a big role. I'll pull up Jaleel McLaughlin's game log so we can take a look at it. All right, so I think we're sorted by week already. Yeah, so last week, Jaleel McLaughlin, he did have 7 carries, which is kind of promising to see how many carries he got. 0 targets on 18% route participation. So even when we saw the route participation come up from where it had been the 2 prior weeks, it was still just 18%. He ran 8 total routes, didn't see a target, has not seen a target in the past 3 weeks. The week prior to that, he did have 3. That was tied. I guess he had 5 in week 1. But outside of week 1, his high is 3 in a game. So even as the pass catching back, man, we really thought this was going to be an offense that was going to target running backs a lot coming into the year. Has not been the case at all. He is just not really used that much in the passing game, even for the passing game back. And 7 carries? He has an 8 carry game, a 9 carry game, 10 carry game. But has not really shown much in terms of like upside in terms of usage as far as just getting raw carries goes too. Ultimately, I think he's going a little bit over-owned for the usage that he gets. 5.5 carries per game over the past 2 weeks, and then two carries a week prior to that, so even worse. And then just not running that many routes, not really seeing any targets. Has some contingent upside, but even if something were to happen to Javonte Williams, it would probably be a split backfield between Audric Estime and Javonte Williams. So I don't even think we have quite the same massive contingent value that we had like last night with Jordan Mason, who apparently hurt himself during the game. So I think that's why Isaac Orendo ended up getting more usage later in the game that we weren't necessarily expecting. I think that it was because Jordan Mason maybe hurt himself during that game. He's now on IR. In this game, I don't think we have anybody, like we can't count on either of Estime or Jaleel McLaughlin suddenly being the bell cow if something were to happen to Javonte. And most often that's not going to happen anyway. So we don't have much contingent upside. We have some and not much standalone value. So ultimately, I think I'm going to be underweight on Audric Estime at around 17% total ownership. Not sure if I'll get to any at captain. If the opto gives me some, I'll allow it, but not excited to play Jaleel McLaughlin at captain. Audric Estime, somewhat more interesting, 13% ownership in the flex for Estime. He's 4,000, so a little bit cheaper than Jaleel McLaughlin. Isn't really involved in the passing game at all, but we did see the spike out of nowhere again 3 weeks ago, 14 carries, and that was just, they didn't say anything going into the game that made us think that Audric Estime was going to get the bulk of the carries there. We also actually, let me pull up the Coach Speak Index Discord because we actually had some interesting, if you ever want to trust Sean Payton, which you probably shouldn't ever try to trust Sean Payton, but I'd say I still think probably positive coach speak is better than negative coach speak, even though I don't really want to buy into it much. We did get some good quotes here on Audric Estime on the 25th, so about a week ago. Sean Payton said, "We're excited about Audric Estime's future. I got to continue to find ways to get him more touches." And this is Coach Speak Index note is Payton has a 50% reliability rating on usage/workload Coach Speak. So toss your hands up. Maybe they'll do what they say. Maybe they won't, I guess. That's not great, 50% reliability. But at least they're saying that they want to get him more touches. And then he added later on, he said, I'm glad we're not getting towards the end of the season and not knowing about some of these rookies. Now with Audric, I've got to continue to find his role. But then I think we also had another quote. Maybe it wasn't Ed Estime. No, it was Marvin Mims had another quote later on. So yeah, that's all we got on Audric Estime. They're saying they want to get him more involved, find a role for him. Believe it if you want to. There's always some risk in trying to trust Sean Payton. But we saw it a few weeks ago, had a random 14 carry week. I think that it could happen here. It wouldn't be the most shocking thing if suddenly he had more of a role. He actually, I didn't realize this, 2 weeks ago had 3 targets in a game on just 4 routes run. So outside of that, zero targets on the entire season, except for just randomly spiked 3 target game. It's unpredictable with the Broncos. So ultimately at 13% ownership, a little bit cheaper than Jaleel McLaughlin. I think I'm willing to be with the field, I think, on Estime. Probably not really over the field, but I'm probably going to match 13% or so on Estime. I think that's a fair number. And again, not somebody I would want to put in my captain spot, but probably fine if he makes it in with your opto. I'm not going to do anything to limit that. And then I don't think I'm going to anybody else on Denver. Michael Burton, I guess, would be the other option. He's 400. Actually, let me just pull up the game log real quick on Burton. Yeah, he had 1 carry, 1 target last week. So not nothing. 2 carries, 1 target the week prior. So he's at least seeing the field a little bit, but I don't really think Burton has a ton of upside. He's just a kind of a worst Kyle use check, I guess. Like you can hope for a random like goal line carry or something or a couple targets. He's 400, so I think he's, I guess, playable, but I'm not going to get too much Michael Burton, if any. Certainly not a priority for me. On the other side, we have Nick Chubb at 9,400, rushing for about 3 yards per carry this year. It has been bad for Nick Chubb. Actually, before I get into that, Javonte Williams, Denver running back situation. Let me take a look at my notes for the Denver situation. As far as the matchup goes, let's see. The Browns defense has allowed the third fewest schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to running backs over the past 5 weeks. So I'm already not excited about playing Javonte Williams. It's also a tough matchup for Javonte Williams. So that is worth noting. Yeah, nothing too exciting there. Okay. Moving on to the Browns running backs. We have I missed whatever Tommy was doing or spam or whatever, but appreciate you for taking care of that, mods. Okay. As far as the other running backs go, sorry, 1 second. Nick Chubb is getting 31% ownership in the flex, 9% at captain for Nick Chubb. So getting nearly 40% ownership for Nick Chubb. I don't love it. I think I'm going to be light, probably light in the flex. I don't know that I'll be light in the captain spot. 9%. I might come in a little bit light there too. Just not really involved in the passing game at all. We saw it again last week. We had the Browns on a showdown slate. Nick Chubb, I think scored 2 touchdowns. It's certainly within the range of outcomes for Nick Chubb to score 2 touchdowns. He had 19 carries in that game, so he is the closest thing we have to a bell cow in this game. This is, you can see in the 5 games he's been back, he's had double-digit carries in each of them. They clearly want him to be their lead back. I still think at some point they might realize, like, okay, he's just not that efficient right now. Like, why are we trying to force Nick Chubb to be the guy when he's just clearly like he's recovering from a serious injury? Like, he's just doesn't have the juice that he had last year. So I think at some point they might realize that. Pete says at any moment could be the Nick Chubb breakout game, and this is the type of game for it to happen. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, that could be true. Like, he probably still has the breakaway speed to just like bust off a long one. Just have not seen it yet for Nick Chubb. I'm not excited about playing him at 40% ownership. I will certainly be light on Nick Chubb. If he does come in at 40% ownership, I'll probably try to get to, 25, 30% total ownership on Nick Chubb and just lean in other places. I would not be surprised if the captain ownership comes in lighter than 9%. Maybe I'm wrong, because people know the name, so maybe that's another reason that like hand builders will want to put Nick Chubb in there at captain. So maybe it's a fair number, but ultimately I think I'm going to be probably a little bit light at both captain and the flex on Nick Chubb. Just not that enthusiastic about it until he shows that efficiency, and that's not generally the way I play DFS. Like, you don't want to like wait until you see it from a player to play them, but because the field is playing so much, I think I end up a little bit light on Nick Chubb. Behind Nick Chubb, we have Jerome Ford, 4,400. I think he looks great. So at captain, we have Jerome Ford coming in at, actually, I shouldn't say I think he looks great until we actually look at updated ownership numbers. Sub 1% captain ownership for Jerome Ford. I mean, it's not a priority for me at captain. I'm more inclined to play him in the flex. In the flex, Jerome Ford coming in at 11.5% ownership. I think that he looks like the strongest backup running back on the slate. I think he, again, could have, like, I think he has more standalone value than Estime or Jaleel McLaughlin. Now we could see Estime just out of nowhere suddenly have a big spike in terms of usage, and I think that's less likely with Jerome Ford. But I mean, this is something that, you might remember on the last Showdown slate, I was thinking, well, maybe at some point they just decide, like, he's our most efficient back. Why don't we just give more of the workload to Jerome Ford. He was kind of returning from injury. They have not shown any inclination to make Jerome Ford their lead back with Nick Chubb there. So we saw the past couple weeks, 5 carries and then 4 carries, as Nick Chubb had 19 in that game. So just really small share of the backfield for Jerome Ford last week. He is their pass catching back. Did have 4 targets 2 weeks ago, just 1 target last week, but still right around 50% route participation. So I think that we could see a spike in terms of, he has 2 games with 7 targets, as you see here. I still think that's within the range of outcomes, that he suddenly sees, 5 to 7 targets in this game. And obviously in the right game script, if they get behind, and this is a game where Denver is favored to win, so they could get behind and suddenly becomes a Jerome Ford game. So I think he has multiple paths to standalone value. It could be, on the one hand, maybe they just realize like, oh, he's running like more yards per carry every game. Why don't we just use him a little bit more in the running game? The more likely scenario where he gets more standalone value would be they get behind, they decide to start throwing the ball a lot, and he, is the like 4th quarterback that they just have in there because they're throwing it a ton. But then he also just has awesome contingent value. Like with the Broncos, you're not really sure who has a contingent value between Estime and Jaleel McLaughlin. Probably some have, both have some value, but neither has all of it. Whereas for the Browns, it's like it's all going to be Jerome Ford for the most part. Like he would probably become the bell cow like we saw earlier in the year if something were to happen to Nick Chubb. So I think he has multiple paths to like standalone value even with Nick Chubb healthy. And then I think he also has awesome contingent value in the case of a blowout, or mostly in an injury to Nick Chubb he would suddenly look great. So I think the ownership seems light at 11.5% on Jerome Ford. I'm going to be overweight to that number. He's expensive enough that it's not like, a slam dunk at 4,400. It's going to be tough for him to get there in most game scripts. But yeah, I'm willing to take shots there just because I think that there is pretty huge upside for Jerome Ford. So I'll probably try to get to, 15-20% Jerome Ford, something like that, above weight to the field. And then I don't think I'm going to any other Browns running backs. Yeah, you can see here, nobody else has got any run. Pure Strong in, what week is that? I guess that was just 2 weeks ago. Pure Strong played 7 snaps, had 2 carries. I guess you could play him as a dart throw. What's even the price on Pure Strong? Oh, he's 1,400, so he's not even 200. Yeah, I'm probably not going to get to any Pure Strong. I'd rather just, any ownership that I was going to give, exposure I was going to give to Pure Strong, I'd just rather give it to Jerome Ford or some of the other like cheaper pass catching options. So I don't think I get to Pure Strong today. Okay, I think that does it for the running backs. In terms of the schedule adjusted matchup for the Browns running backs, I will read that off. Broncos defense has allowed the 7th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to running backs over the past 5 weeks. So it's actually been a pretty nice matchup for running backs facing the Broncos. So, nice little cookie for the Browns running backs if you want to go there. All right, I'm going to move on to wide receivers. I'll check in with any questions you guys might have. Matt Schwab says, oh no, Jerome Ford again. Listen, you don't have to play him just because I'm playing him. If you don't want to play Jerome Ford, if you don't like the reasons that I'm given to play him, just don't play him. You are welcome to not play him. He's going to fail in most instances. It's just, I think he has better than 12% chance of being somebody that you want in your lineup. And like some of that is like somebody you need in your lineup where he's just like absolutely crushing. So I like the upside there, but you definitely don't need to tail me on Ford. He's going to fail way more often than he's going to succeed. So feel free. All right, let's go. All right. I'm scrolling. I don't see any other. How often does Cleveland run 12-man? I've not pulled that up, but quite a bit of 12-man for Cleveland. I know that because just look at the tight end route participation. It is a high number. Maybe we'll look there when we get to tight ends if we have time. Let's see. Red zone work for running backs. I guess we can pull up. 1 second. So I'm going to go to rushing, advanced rushing. And we can see inside the 5 work for the Broncos running backs. So inside the 5 carries, maybe we just want to do like the past few weeks. Let's just do that. Let's just do the past few weeks for the Broncos. So it's going to be a small sample size, obviously. Okay, so zero inside the 5 carries over the past few weeks for the Broncos. So maybe the bigger sample size is better. For the Browns, it's all going to be Nick Chubb. Yeah, 75% of the inside the 5 carries go to Nick Chubb since he's been back. But let's see, I guess Broncos on the season. Javonte Williams getting most of that work. But again, I think it's just sporadic. I think Estime very clearly like capable of being an inside the 5 carrier. Maybe they're concerned about fumbles there. But yeah, Javonte has been the guy so far this year. All right, let's move on to wide receivers if we don't have any other questions. How relevant is, well, we'll get to wide receivers. I guess I'll be doing it now. So let's talk about it. Okay. Moving on to wide receivers. Hang on one second. Oh, I already moved it down. Okay. We can talk about wide receivers. In terms of projection, the highest projected is going to be Courtland Sutton. He's projected for 14 fantasy points, getting 40% ownership in the flex. At captain, Courtland Sutton getting 11% ownership. I'd want to be over 11% on Courtland Sutton. One of the few players that has like a really defined role in this game. 11% to me seems, I think it's lighter than it was this morning. I think it was like 16, 17%. So if it does come down to 11%, which is what it's projected for currently, I'd like to be over that number on Courtland Sutton. He's had a pretty great role all year, really. I mean, just look at it. On the year, 94 targets in 12 games. He has 79% route participation, just a clear number one receiver for the Broncos. I don't think I need to sell you on Courtland Sutton on the season. He is PPR. He's scoring 13.8 fantasy points per game, 15.4 expected fantasy points per game. He has a great role. And like relative to everybody else on the Broncos, I mean, you can see just the fantasy points per game they're worlds behind him. I guess Vele's 9.3 is, not bad. But nobody is like the expected fantasy points, even more so. There's a big gap between Vele and Courtland Sutton and everybody else, even behind Vele. Courtland Sutton's just got a great role on this team. We can expect him to see the majority of the targets. Everything looks good for Courtland Sutton. And again, I anticipate I would be above weight to 11%. Courtland Sutton in the captain spot. In the flex, again, Courtland Sutton, 40% ownership. I'll probably match the field there. I have no issue with that. I think he looks like a pretty strong play. All right. Let's see. So I don't know if I need to say anything else about Courtland Sutton. I think again, probably going to be overweight at captain. I'll probably have over 50% Courtland Sutton overall. We just don't have that many players that we are. I mean, you can see it in the projections here. We've got Bo Nix at 19 is his projection, and then it drops down. It's like 14 for Winston, 14 for Sutton. Then it's down to 11 for Judy, 11 for Nick Chubb. Just we don't have a lot of really strong projections, so I still want my lineups to project well. I'll probably be above 50% on Courtland Sutton. Not by that much, but overall, probably match him, again, match the field, maybe get to 15% in the captain spot, something like that. Outside of Sutton, Vele is the pretty clear wide receiver 2 here. And again, no Josh Reynolds, so we don't have to worry about things shaking up here, but we can just look at, actually, let me check my notes just so I have the sample size in front of me. Give me 1 second. Okay, I just did the past 3 weeks, so I'll pull that up here. So over the past 3 weeks, look at all the Broncos. Devon Vele has 18 targets, so he's been targeted 6 times per game over the past 3 weeks. 61.6% route participation, which again is second on the team. Looks really good. Like he has the pretty clear wide receiver 2 role for the Broncos. Let's take a look at who's running the slot routes. Yeah, it's Devon Vele, 59% from the slot. He's got a pretty defined role there. 6 targets per game. I'll take it. And he is kind of expensive. Like he's priced like the wide receiver too. But just 6,400. So not like mega expensive, just getting 23% ownership in the flex. At captain, we have Devon Vele coming in. He's pretty cheap at captain, 3% captain ownership. You saw Debro knows ball, and he's telling you Devon Vele captain. I think it looks pretty good. Like 3% captain does feel a bit light. The flex ownership feels a bit light also. So I do imagine I will be overweight to Devon Vele here. I think he looks like a pretty strong mid-range play where he's going to get some usage. We have a lot of wide receivers that are like going to get some usage, probably see a few targets. Yeah, I think Vele is one of the more like we know the role of Vele. So I think I will be overweight, probably both in the captain and the flex on Vele. And then it gets a lot hairier after the top two. So we have Sutton, we have Vele, and then beyond those two, it is Troy Franklin. And I'm curious if the projected ownership has held, because 45.5% route participation. He is third by that metric. 8 targets over the past 3 weeks. So a little over, I guess, just one fewer than 3 targets per game for Troy Franklin, but he's running a lot of routes. As of this morning, he was getting pretty minimal ownership. Yeah, still at 11%. So it's come up a lot. I think it was 1% this morning. So now it's up to 11%. I still think that's a number that I'm going to be above weight to. Not like I'm going to have 40%, but I think I probably want to have 15% Troy Franklin. Because again, he is third in terms of route participation over the past handful of weeks. He's seen some targets. I guess he's, not as high up on the list in terms of targets over the past few weeks, but he's a rookie. It's later in the year. You kind of hope for those like late season rookie breakouts. He could have a late season rookie breakout. He's the one. He went to college with Bo Nix. They have some chemistry already built in. So we've probably seen what we should see from, but you never know. He's a rookie. We could still see a late season breakout. And the route participation strong enough, the ownership low enough that I'll be overweight to the field on Troy Franklin. Again, probably not getting to much, if any, in the captain spot, but definitely over 11% in the flex. Probably want to get to 15, maybe 20% in the flex. Troy Franklin, I think he looks really good, even after his ownership has come up quite a bit. And then we have Marvin Mims, who actually I'm skipping to Marvin Mims, so I'll wait on Marvin Mims. Low Jordan Humphrey, 40% route participation over the past 3 weeks, 10 targets over that span. Low Jordan Humphrey coming in at 14% ownership. So again, like that's pretty similar role. Now he looks more similar to Troy Franklin, whereas this morning it was like Franklin coming in way lower owned. Now it's like, wouldn't be that shocking if Franklin actually comes in higher owned than Low Jordan Humphrey. I like it. I think he looks good also. Probably another spot that I end up slightly over the field. Like if he ends up at 14%, I probably want to get to 20% Low Jordan Humphrey. And this is a slate where you can certainly leave some salary on the table as a way to avoid dupes, because there are so many of these cheap guys that look pretty good. And I'll be playing as we get through all of the Cleveland guys, the tight ends. You'll see there are several that look pretty good at low ownership. So yeah, I probably end up higher than 14% on Low Jordan Humphrey also. And then finally, Marvin Mims coming in at 18% ownership. His role is pretty interesting, and I missed this earlier. So we were going over it, and I was saying, 19% route participation, 10 targets. It's sort of hard to know what to make of that. That he's just like, he's not running that many routes. But he does have 10 targets in the past 3 games. 2 of those games, he has 4 targets per game. So they're clearly like making him a focal point when he is out there. I guess we can look at first read targets for Marvin Mims. This isn't the part that I missed earlier, but I just want to take a look at it. 8 first read targets. So of 10 total targets, 8 of them have been first read targets in the past few games. I listened to the ETR podcast with John Daigle and Cody Main because I was like, man, this is such a complicated slate. I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. And Daigle brought up that Mims has 8 carries over the past 2 weeks. So I missed that part. And I think that's important. Like because Sean Payton has been talking about wanting to get Mims involved. And how they found different ways to use Mims, and clearly they are. They've used him 8 carries on top of 10 targets over the past 3 weeks. It's actually a pretty strong role for Marvin Mims, and 8 of those being first read targets. So they are clearly trying to get the ball finally to Marvin Mims after multiple years. Maybe it's 1 year. I don't know how long it's been exactly, but of Sean Payton talking about wanting to get the ball to Marvin Mims. They're finally actually coming through and finding ways to get the ball in his hands. Let me read the coach speak quote, the latest on Marvin Mims. On the 27th, head coach Sean Payton said, Marvin Mims does a good job running, does such a good job running that vision can carry over to certain runs in your offense and certain things in the passing game. It's allowed us to kind of expand some packages with him. And then offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi on the 29th said, expanding Marvin Mims Jr.'s role and letting him do different things. He's a talented player. Finding ways to get him the ball is important. And I think we've done a better job of that as of late, and we'll continue to do it. It helps that he's an awfully smart player. So as you give him different personnel packages and ask him to do different things week to week, he picks up on it with no problem. So yeah, they apparently have actually been getting him the ball, 18 total carries over the past 3 weeks. And it's kind of fun when they're scheming up players for a player like Mims. I think Who says getting the side to side runs. I mean, if they're just like throw it, in front of them, do this little thing instead of throwing it behind you, suddenly it's a reception, and that's worth a point for him. And the quarterback benefits also. I think Mims looks great with 18 total touches over the past 3 weeks. He's down to, I thought he was like 26% ownership earlier. So, and I was pretty out on that. That was before I realized that he was getting rushes also, but now down to 18%. You include that he's getting some carries also. I really like Mims now too. Now I think I want to be overweight to 18% Mims. So again, just all of these cheap guys none of them look like stand out as, they're running 80% of the routes and getting 5 targets a game. I really want to play them, but they all look like pretty good at relatively low ownership. So I'm going to be probably overweight to all of these cheap Broncos receivers. I think that is it for the Broncos. Let me double check. Talked about Sutton, Vele, Mims, Lil Jordan, Franklin. Yep, that's all of the Broncos. But again, I think I probably end up a bit overweight on all of them. They look strong. None of them getting 20% ownership. I don't know that I have a favorite. If this ownership holds, and this is a complete 180, I think, on what I was saying this morning, but I think that Mims might actually be my favorite now when you factor in that he's getting some carries also, and the ownership has dropped significantly, and Troy Franklin's has come up significantly. I think now Mims is probably, I'm changing it up to, I think I actually like Mims maybe the best of the group now. But I like all of them. Lil Jordan, Troy Franklin, they all look like pretty strong options at low ownership. The Brown side is a bit more straightforward, and I'm just going to pull up all of the games with Jameis Winston. So that is 4 games in the past. They had a bye week in there. But for the Browns, in terms of schedule adjusted matchup for the wide receivers on the Broncos, let me read off my notes here. You can see it also on the screen. Browns defense has allowed the 6th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to wide receivers over the past 5 weeks. So it has been a great matchup for receivers against the Browns. As you can see here, it is best for receivers lining up wide right. Nice matchup for receivers in the slot. Slight negative matchup for receivers lining up out left. I guess we can take a look just for a second at the wide receiver coverage matchup, see if it shows. And this is a different metric, so it's kind of, we're looking at 2 different metrics here. But by this metric, best matchup would go to Troy Franklin in terms of like how he does against the coverages they play. Troy Franklin, really nice matchup there. Courtland Sutton, still a positive matchup, slight negative matchup for Vele and Lil Jordan Humphrey. It does not include Mims here. I don't know how it chooses what is included in this tool, but this is what we have as of right now, and it looks like a nice matchup for Troy Franklin. All right, I'm going to move on to the Browns, and again over the past 5 weeks, and I'm going to sort by targets over the past 5 weeks. Jerry Jeudy leads with 35 targets in 4 games with Jameis Winston, so little under little under 9 targets per game would be 36. So just under 9 targets per game for Jerry Jeudy, 89.4% route participation. He is benefiting from Jameis Winston's tendency to sling it. Jerry Jeudy coming in at 31% flex ownership, 5% captain ownership. So that number, 5% captain ownership, I do have a good amount of interest in. I'm just going to pull up the research and reports, wide receiver cornerback matchups. So first of all, I guess this is another metric to look at for matchups. So I guess we can look at Denver first. You can see here, all of them just have great matchups according to this tool. And then as far as the Cleveland receivers go, Jeudy is expected to be shadowed by Patrick Surtain. So don't love that for Jerry Jeudy. That does concern me if Patrick Surtain does shadow him. I don't think that that is something that we can have a ton of confidence in. I don't know that Patrick Surtain necessarily does shadow him, but he's been projected to be shadowed by Patrick Surtain. So that's a reason to be kind of cautious, but I don't think that's a reason to not play him at captain. If he's getting 5% ownership, I'd rather just, make the bet that he either can, beat Patrick Surtain or isn't shadowed by Patrick Surtain as much as we're anticipating. Maybe not at all. Who knows? So I think at 5% captain ownership, I'd like to be over that number on Jeudy, but I don't think that. I think in the flex, I probably end up a little bit light. So I probably end up with similar to the field. So the field total ownership on Jeudy coming in, let's see, 5%, and then it was 30. Double check. 31%. So he's getting about 36, 37% total ownership. My guess is that I have a similar amount, but it's going to be more in the captain, less in the flex. I might even end up less overall on Jeudy just because of the price tag. And honestly, the role is not that much better than a lot of his teammates. So I think I probably end up a little bit light overall on Jeudy, but I think I probably end up heavier than 5% at captain. Next, we have Elijah Moore. 33 targets in 4 games with Winston. So again, really strong role since Jameis Winston's been the quarterback, about 75% route participation. He is lining up mostly in the slot. So you kind of get that reduced route participation from slot receivers. A lot of the time he's not out there in 2 wide receiver sets, but getting enough targets when he is out there that Elijah Moore looks really good. Let's take a look at the schedule adjusted over the past 5 weeks for slot receivers specifically. It is, where was it? I thought I saw it. Now I've lost it. Oh, it's a bottom 5 matchup for slot receivers. So not a great matchup for Elijah Moore. I'm still willing to go there. I think he's not getting, let's see. He's 7,800. He's getting 21% ownership in the flex. 3% ownership in the captain spot. I think if we do assume that Jerry Jeudy is going to be shadowed by Patrick Surtain, that would also be a bonus for all the other receivers. So I think ultimately he's getting sub 25% total ownership. I think I come in overweight on Elijah Moore, because maybe it's a bad matchup for slot receivers, but the usage has just been so good for Elijah Moore that I think I'm willing to overlook. He is pretty expensive. I'm not going to be, 50% again, but I think I probably end up over 25% on Elijah Moore ultimately. So not a huge stand there, but I think it's pretty good bet there. I think I end up overweight there. And then beyond Elijah Moore, so Cedric Tillman is out for this game. So that's the reason we're talking about Jamari Thrash. But it vacates 30 targets in 4 games for Cedric Tillman in 3.5 games. I think he was leading at one point the targets for the team over the span with Winston. So that opens up some routes, some targets, etc. David Njoku has 27 targets in 4 games with Winston, 80.4% route participation. Sorry, I'll wait on Njoku until tight ends. Jamari Thrash is the next man up, we are assuming, for the Browns with Cedric Tillman out. He was the one who benefited last week. Here, I can pull that up. And actually, maybe this is the easier way to look at it. Is just this is the weekly route share report for the Browns. So we saw Tillman was up at around 90% route participation and then got hurt midway through week 12. And then we see Jamari Thrash benefits up to 21% route participation. So started running some routes in the second half after Tillman went down last week, after he had been pretty limited prior to that. So I think the general assumption is that it's going to be Jamari Thrash who, takes on a bigger role with Cedric Tillman. I don't think that's guaranteed. But I think that is the general expectation, just looking around the industry at projections. And he is not projected for much ownership. Jamari Thrash, okay, he's up to 13.5%. I think earlier he was like 8%. So it's come up a bit. I still think I want to be overweight to that number because he is the most likely to be next man up for Cleveland, just based on what we saw last week. And he's only 1,000, so it wouldn't take much to pay off his price tag. So I think Jamari Thrash looks awesome. Definitely somebody that I plan to be. I'll probably be double the field on Jamari Thrash in the flex. I don't know that I get to any yet captain. He's not going to get much captain ownership. Maybe I'll check myself before I say that. Yeah, less than 1% captain ownership. But mostly, I think he looks great in the flex, even though his ownership has come up. I don't think it's come up enough to like where it should be. So I like Jamari Thrash quite a bit. I'll probably be double the field there. Somebody just asked about Kadarius Toney. He's not projected for any ownership here. Let me double check another source on Kadarius Toney. See if anybody else is giving him any kind of ownership. Yeah, other places giving him like 1 to 2% ownership. He's probably a fair bet. I think I probably want to be I think I'd be more inclined to go to Kadarius Toney than Jalen Darden, Michael Woods, any of the other wide receivers beyond Jamari Thrash. Again, Jamari Thrash probably the best bet there and the one that I plan to be double the field. But if Kadarius Toney is going to be sub 1%, I'll probably try to force in 3 or 4% because there's a real zero possibility for Kadarius Toney. The downside is real, but they're needing to fill in a lot of usage from Cedric Tillman. He has experience in the NFL. There is some possibility that, let me just look, I guess this is the past 4 weeks. Have we seen 0 targets on 2 routes run total for Kadarius Toney? Was it last game? Did he get any? No, he played in week 11, did not play at all last week. I don't know. He might have been inactive. I actually don't remember if that's the case. But regardless, I think Toney, he's active for this game. Maybe they use him a little bit more now that Tillman's out. So Toney, a fine bet for if you're in a playing 20 lineups, if you want to throw him in one, I think that's a reasonable bet to make. I think it's also reasonable if you don't want to take any chances on Toney because we've got plenty of other strong value that have better roles and they're not getting much ownership. And then I think Jalen Darden is kind of the same thing. If you'd prefer that bet to Toney, go ahead. I think Toney would be my preference as far as the bets go, and he's the one that is getting a better projection here. I think just a little bit more likely to have some role, but I think Darden also GPP dart throw in the largest field tournaments, totally a fine play. I think that does it for the wide receivers. Yeah, I think that does it for the wide receivers. All right, I'm just going to check on any questions that we have. Steve wants to know if Coach Speak has said anything. Chuck G says Surtain was projected to shadow Myers last week and he didn't. Yeah, I mean, again, I don't think that it's a sure thing that he shadows Judy, but it's how it's being projected at least. Let me read the Coach Speak. I don't think Coach Speak said anything as of this morning, but let me double check myself because I might be forgetting. Let's see. They really like Jerry Jeudy. A lot of positive stuff on Jerry Jeudy. Catching short throws, turning them into long gains, catching the ball down the field. They really like Jerry Jeudy. Is generally the what I'm getting from Coach Speak. But let me just make sure I'm not missing anything on the other guys, potentially bigger roles. Yeah, I don't think that they have anything here. It's just Jerry Jeudy is very smart. Does a great job with feel of the game, understanding of coverages, but then also being able to move him around in different places. We can play him inside, outside, X, Z, slot, whatever it is. Having that flexibility is huge. They just really like Jerry Jeudy. They go on and on about Jerry Jeudy. But no, they have not. They have not said anything, at least in the Coach Week Index Discord, and they're pretty thorough. So I don't think they've said anything on Jamari Thrash or anybody else. So kind of leaving it open to us to figure it out. All right. We'll move on to tight ends. May change more with Njoku depending on ownership and flex. All right, let's see. Yeah, I think I've answered the questions. Sorry, I know I missed some of these questions sometimes because it's tough when I'm hosting and doing everything here. But if you have any other questions, if I missed, feel free to throw one in. Okay. Let's move on to tight ends. We've already got it pulled up on the Browns. David Njoku is going to have the highest projection of any tight end anyway, and we'll look at the ownership here. In the flex, Njoku coming in at 27% ownership. Captain Njoku coming in at 5% ownership. It was predicted earlier that I was going to like David Njoku. That was correct. I like David Njoku quite a bit. I think he's a very talented pass catcher. The usage has not been like I've kind of expected him to be the one who benefits the most from playing with Jameis and who like ultimately leads the team in targets, and that has not been the case. We haven't seen. I think he had a little bit of a better week last week. Let's see. No, it's the week prior. He had 9 targets in week 11, back down to 4 targets against Pittsburgh. So they clearly don't love him as much as I think they should love him. But 97% route participation in week 12, which was, I assume, a season high. Yeah, it's season high 97%, 97% route participation. He had 9 targets the week prior. I don't know. I still think Njoku is probably their most talented receiver. In the 4 games with Jameis Winston overall, 27 targets, 80.4% route participation. I think that he's getting low enough ownership that, again, I'm just wanting to make that bet on David Njoku. He's 8,400, so it's cheaper than Jerry Jeudy. Getting lower ownership. Yeah, that's a bet that I am going to be going back to. I don't believe it is a great matchup, but let me check my notes. Yeah, better for Denver. If only they had a tight end that we could actually love. Yeah, it's the worst possible matchup over the past 5 weeks for tight ends for David Njoku. So not a great matchup. Again, I think I'm willing to overlook that because he's getting low enough ownership that I'm going to be taking shots there on David Njoku. I'm going to be over the field in the captain spot. I think I'm going to be over the field in the flex spot. Obviously, I'd prefer it if it was a great matchup for tight ends. But I'm still willing to go there. Let's take a look at the coverage matrix. Yeah, so as far as coverage grade goes, great matchup for so Cedric Tillman. So that would be, I guess, Jamari Thrash. Positive for Jerry Jeudy, positive for David Njoku in terms of like the coverage schemes that they run. He does well in them, and then not as good for Elijah Moore or Jordan Akins. But yeah, I think it's a good spot for. I mean, even if it's not the best matchup, I think that we could just we're going to see some games, I think, where we just see double-digit targets for David Njoku. I think that this is as good a week as any for that to happen. So I'll be overweight to the field on Njoku. And then we have the aforementioned Jordan Akins also coming in at, let's see. So he's also up to 12%. So he was also around 8% earlier. He has come up a bit. He's 2,400. I like him just a bit less than Thrash. But I think Jordan Akins is a really strong play also at 12%. He's more expensive than Thrash and now getting just a little bit less, like almost the same ownership. We did see him benefit last week from Tillman's injury, just looking at the route participation. So again, Tillman 48%. We saw Jordan Akins come up from 18% in week 11 to 45% in week 12, which I think is really promising. Here, I kind of want to check. Hang on one second. Bear with me for a second. I want to look at just last week. So week 12. And I'm going to sort it by quarter so we can see when he was running routes. All right, so by quarter, in the fourth quarter. So he ran 4 routes, 31% route participation in the fourth quarter for Jordan Akins, 46% for Jamari Thrash. Blake Whiteheart actually ran 2 routes in the fourth quarter. We still had, more Judy running all the routes. Third quarter, again, Blake Whiteheart. So maybe Blake Whiteheart is somebody we need to consider. Blake Whiteheart ran, I guess, just 1 route in the third quarter, 1 route in the second quarter. So maybe not something we need to seriously consider. But in the third quarter, after Tillman went down, Tillman ran 100% of the routes in the third quarter. Am I in the right week? Yeah, week 12. Huh. I don't remember what happened there with Tillman. Did he leave the game and come back? Because he didn't play in the fourth at least. So yeah, I guess he got hurt at the end of the third quarter because he didn't run any routes in the fourth. So we don't have that great of a sample size, but it was Jamari Thrash came in, ran 6 routes in the fourth. Jordan Akins ran 4. It doesn't appear that the injury to Tillman actually had that big of an impact because he was already 60% in the third quarter and then lower in the fourth without Tillman there. But I still think, we could see 40%, 50% route participation for Jordan Akins. That threw me off because I thought that he had got the more routes because of Tillman being out, and apparently he was just already getting more routes, just more 2 tight end sets there for the Browns. But I think he's pretty strong play at low ownership anyway. Again, I'll be over the field. I'll probably get to 20% Akins, 25% Thrash, something like that. All right, I'm gonna hurry up here. Just do defenses and kickers real quickly. Take a brief look at FanDuel. Move on. Defenses, kickers, and I think that they look good. Broncos defense, 23% ownership in the flex looks fine to me. I think I probably come in at or over that number. Dustin Hopkins, 18%. Don't hate that. Probably going to match the field, get to maybe 20%. Will Lutz, 18%. I probably get to 20%. And finally, Browns defense, 12%. That's come up. It was 10% earlier in the day. I still like that number. Adam didn't love it. He said that his Sims had it 10% optimal for the Browns defense. I think that they're better than that. I think 3,600 a bit too cheap. I think that they're a good defense playing against a rookie quarterback. I'm going to be overweight to 12% on the Browns, but again, that is not backed by Adam Sims at least. My brain Sims tell me that feels a bit low for a $3,600 defense. I guess it's because we have so many other cheap options. Maybe that's the reason that they're not standing out. But I think Browns defense looks pretty strong at 12% ownership. That's a number that I want to be above weight to. Broncos defense, if you didn't watch the morning show, Adam Sims were loving the Broncos defense specifically at captain, where they're not getting as much ownership, 3% captain ownership. That is a number that I plan to be overweight on also. Again, they're playing against Jameis Winston, who just slings it, makes a lot of mistakes. So I think that there are elevated opportunities for pick sixes and huge scoring opportunities. Okay, wait. All right, moving on. I'm going to check briefly FanDuel, make a couple lineups, and then I'm out to make my lineups. So we'll see if anything's different on FanDuel. MVP ownership, Bo Nix getting the most, as he probably should. You need the highest raw score in the MVP spot on FanDuel. Winston 16% seems pretty good to me. Chubb 10%, no issues there. 8% Sutton looks really, really good actually as a contrarian play. Njoku 4% looks good as a contrarian play for me. I think Javonte's fine. I think you could actually on FanDuel also playing the Broncos defense at MVP makes some sense. Just hope for a gross game. And that's probably about it as far as I have interest in on FanDuel for MVP. In the flex, 40.5% Winston, 39% going to Nix. He's pretty expensive. So that makes sense that he's not super high owned in the flex. Nick Chubb, 26% is I probably come in light there. Sutton, 26%. I'd rather have more Sutton than Chubb. Broncos defense again looks pretty good at 23%. Elijah Moore coming in sub 16% looks really good on FanDuel to me at 10 1,000. Marvin Mims, 14%. I actually like that number. He's only 7,500, only getting 14% ownership. I think that looks like a pretty strong bet. Low Jordan Humphrey, 11%. Again, I'm going to go to Jerome Ford here at 9% ownership at 8K. That's a good bet. Troy Franklin, Jamari Thrash, both around 8%. A lot of really good options on FanDuel, honestly. Kadarius Toney, 4%. Oh, I didn't even do Broncos tight ends. I'll just show you real quick why I didn't bother doing Broncos tight ends. I'm going to move this back to DraftKings real quickly. And to be clear, I think Broncos tight ends are like playable. Lucas Kroll. I think Lucas Kroll would be my favorite just because I still think he's a pretty fine pass catcher. They haven't really done anything recently. So 4% projected ownership to Lucas Kroll in the flex, I think, is a number that I probably match. I might even be a little bit above that on Kroll. Adam Troutman, 7%, 1,600. I like Kroll a little bit better. But they're kind of all Nate Adkins getting 1.5% ownership. They're basically all just dart throws. If you look at the Broncos usage, and let's see, how do I want to do this? Look at the game log for Broncos. So in week 12, Lucas Kroll ran 20.5% of the routes, had 0 targets. Nate Adkins ran 9% of routes, had 0 targets. Adam Troutman ran 25% of routes, saw 2 targets. And this is without Greg Dulcich. He was gone. None of them really had any kind of strong route participation or target share. In week 11, I think Dulcich was gone. Yeah, Dulcich is gone. Lucas Kroll, 23% route participation, 0 targets. Nate Adkins, 11% route participation, 1 target. Adam Troutman, one target on 20%. So I think Nate Adkins we can basically disregard. I think Troutman and Kroll are both fine dart throws. Maybe better than your average backup tight end just because they could suddenly they decide this is going to be our tight end and maybe a little bit more upside in terms of just the team deciding we're going to go to this guy as our tight end. But man, they have not given us any indication that they love any of these tight ends. So I don't think any of them have any floor, and maybe they have some upside. Okay. Finally, I am going to make a lineup here real quick. I think there are several good options we could go to. Let's try Njoku captain lineup. There he is, 12-6. Probably just throw Winston there since I have Njoku. You don't necessarily need to. It's one way to get different would be to not go there. Let's throw Vele in there. Maybe I go to Sutton and Nix, and then I still have 1,200 left over. So now could go to Kroll, could go to, Thrash. Now you're using a lot of salary if you go to Thrash here. This is a lineup that I don't hate though. You're using kind of a low-owned Thrash. But this is probably going to be duped quite a bit. So maybe I want to get away from Vele in this one and instead go to Jerome Ford or Broncos defense. Now we're leaving 1,200 on the table. So that's a little bit different. You've got Broncos defense in there against Njoku and Winston, Stack, and Thrash. So yeah, I think this could work for a large field GPP. There's an example of a, I think, strong large field GPP lineup. Okay. Franklin, Vele captain. All right, I'll do one with Vele captain, and then I am out because that is the Debro specialist, the Vele captain. Vele is 9,600. Again, probably throw a Bo Nix in there. Now I'm going to go to, let's do a full-on Broncos onslaught lineup maybe. Who do I want from Cleveland in a Broncos onslaught? Well, I'll continue the onslaught with Javonte, Sutton, and then I have 8,000 left over. So Moore is too close. I'd be using too close to the salary cap. So then maybe I just go to who's a good. Do we not have any cheap Browns that I like? Jerome Ford would be fine. Elijah Moore a little bit too expensive. So yeah, maybe I go to Jerome Ford. And we're leaving 3,600 on the table. I don't totally love this lineup. So maybe I don't do a full onslaught. Instead of Javonte, go to JMO, and we're leaving 800 on the table. I think that works too. Okay. I got to get out of here because I had to go make my lineups, and I have about 10 minutes left. Appreciate all of you hanging out here. Please do subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Trying to get to 5,000 subscribers by the end of the NFL season. So would appreciate you. Like the video, comment. All of that is very helpful to me and the YouTube algorithm. Appreciate you all. I got to get going. Make my lineups. Good luck tonight. Let's make some money, and I will see you on Thursday.